Запис.
Good afternoon, esteemed participants of today's event. Please allow me to start this event. Let me introduce myself. My name is Pavlo Kravets, and I am a professor of the Ukrainian National Forestry Agro-Microaeratia Institute, and I represent IMC. I will moderate today's event, and let's start with a couple of logistical issues. We will use both Ukrainian and English languages, so please make use of the headphones or choose the proper language channel. I'm referring to online audience. At the bottom of the dashboard, you will find the interpretation symbol, and you will there select the proper language channel. So the duration is up to 2 hours, but the organizer stated that if need be, we can work even longer. And I would like to kindly ask the audience here in the hall, please, by raise of hands, wait for the mic and introduce yourselves. And those of our participants who are online, please make use of two options. Firstly, you can share your question via chat, or you can raise hand. So use the raise hand function. My job as a moderator is to keep track of raise hands, and hopefully these would be brief and to the point questions. By the way, as for the agenda for today's event, we will have the opening remarks from the relevant government officials, then keynote presentations, and then panel discussion, which will include the Q&A session that I will moderate. So with this agenda in mind, let us start with the welcoming speeches. The representative of the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, Mr. Anatoly Barsuk, the head of the Forestry and Reforestation Unit. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, I would like to thank you for running such an important event, because the stock taking and the inventory of the forestry resources is of a vital importance right now, allowing us to both identify the available forestry resources in Ukraine, which would only help to promote further forestry developments, legislative changes, which are quite required. So I wish all of us fruitful and successful work. Thank you. And now the floor goes for welcoming speech to the head of the Forestry Department of the State Forest Resources Agency, Mr. Igor Budzinski. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues, guests, friends. It's a pleasure to attend an event like this, because it's of a very serious caliber indeed, especially well, it becomes the milestone event in light of the current status of our forestry. By the way, the background of the National Forestry Inventory Initiative started in a very interesting period of time, which coincided, quite unfortunately, with full-fledged war. The National Inventory of Forests was launched in 2021, while early next year, the enemy launched its full-fledged aggression with huge swaths of territories being occupied or because of the military hostilities not accessible because of contamination with explosive devices. But I still remember March of 2022, early March actually, when we came together, five or six of us, and we wanted to decide what would be the future of the National Inventory project. Should we put it on hold? Well, after the first steps in 2021, when we passed the procedure on forestry inventory, something that allowed to streamline the process, which we did. And early March, full-fledged war in Ukraine. We still, despite of that, decided that we should not put the national inventory of forests on hold. But of course, we will have to adjust to the way how we implemented the project. And with the help of our German partners, uh, it was still in 2022 when we started adapting the process of national inventory of forests to the war conditions. And thus, we introduced the relevant changes into the procedure, taking the curfew and into consideration, and it stipulated quite a revolutionary tool at that time, which was the remote sensing technology. And we are so much grateful to this project and to the German colleagues who were quite enthusiastic and instrumental in making it all happen. They helped with the finances. They came up with a methodology, with the guidelines. They adjusted and adapted it to the current environment. And finally, we already have some first results to present to you. And that's what we'll do. We'll present the findings, the results, the achievements that we have delivered over the course of the last year. And hopefully, Mr. Victor Miranyuk would cover all that in great detail because I believe we have not a lot of stuff to be proud of, and we should not rest on our laurels because the this methodology should be further adjusted and streamlined because it it would be greatly beneficial for the country at large. And I'm very much convinced in that. And then our experience might be useful for other European and world countries. So thank you, and I wish all of us successful workshop. Thank you. Thank you, Ihor, for your in-depth welcoming speech. By the way, uh, when I entered these premises, I looked at the post and it says how many forest resources are there in Ukraine. So we might learn today the results of the national inventory of forests, but taking this remote sensing technology in mind, because this becomes a unique opportunity for us to discuss in greater detail, to share opinions and thoughts, to um, try and figure out how achieved results could impact managerial decisions and how it could help with the further developments and rejuvenation both of the forestry business and the country at large. The National Inventory Initiative and all the results that have been achieved so far could not have been achieved without the support of the um, funding from the German government and the um, And now let me get straight into the presentation, well, and of course of the Sustainable Forestry Implementation Project. So, and now I would give the floor to CEO of Ukrdержлеспроект, Mr. Viktor Melnichenko, with a report. So the head of the State Forest Management Planning Association, Ukraine, on the way of carrying out national inventory of forests in Ukraine. Hello, everyone. My name is Viktor Melnichenko. I am the head um, of the State Forest Management Planning Association. So in addition to forest planning and forest management functions, we are also in charge of national inventory of Ukrainian forests. So let me remind you briefly, and because not everyone is a narrow subject matter expert here, so but let me remind you briefly as to how the national inventory of forests happened. Like Igor Leonidovich already mentioned, it was started back in 21, and uh, it's a way of regular surveys to get statistically supported information about forests that would be used for the needs of planning of forestry business, including strategic planning, especially under the war conditions. In respect of distant, remote um, tech, sensing technology, well, this already became part and parcel of our legislative base because now we have fully regulated the data obtained with air, photo, and outer space pictures, anything that we could use to remotely sense the surface of the Earth. If we talk more about the background of this whole initiative, we started with regional initiatives back in 2014 through 2017. And such inventories happened on the territory of close to 1 million hectares, where we collected data in Ivano-Frankivsk and Sumy regions. The next stage was to draft national law on running national inventory. Back in 2020, we introduced the relevant changes and amendments to the forestry code, where we fully regulated this ability to carry out the inventory. In 2021, we have approved the cabinet minister's resolution on the procedure for the inventory, and it was when the inventories was started back in 2021. Of course, if we talk, and Igor Leonidovich mentioned this already, that the beginning of the national inventory initiative coincided with the Russian military aggression, and this brought extra challenges to us. We had back in early 2022, after the launch of this full-fledged invasion of the Russian Federation, to introduce certain changes into our laws and regulations to allow us to conduct certain initiatives under war conditions, and all the territories that were not accessible at that time.
That's why we decided to continue the inventory based on the technology of remote sensing. That's pretty much it in brief, but what the national inventory contemplates, in fact, it means that the whole of the territory of our state is divided into the 5 per 5 kilometers square, within which there are inventory plots. The total area of inventory plots is 96.6 thousand plots, including 20,000 forest inventory plots, which are subject to inventory during the process of collection of information. During this period, starting from year 21 all the way until the year 23, our employees were able to collect information from 4,163 inventory plots. And in fact, all that information was laid as a foundation for summary or generalization of the remote sensing of the forest. National inventory is currently facing certain obstacles related to martial law. We currently clearly understand that the state has way more substantial problems related to armed aggression. And today, sometimes we don't have opportunity to get enough available or sufficient available funding that results in attrition of personnel and opportunities for employment of high-skilled personnel. As a result of Russian aggression, well, our organization was severely affected. We've lost a lot of material, a lot of tools, and it all resulted in obstacles for inventory of the forests on a national level. At the same time, there is a huge challenge, such as lack of access to a lot of our territories for agricultural works. Currently, there is a restricted access to a huge part of the territory of Ukraine, and we are unable to gather relevant data from the fields. At the same time, in order not to stop our work, in order to continue with the national inventory of forests, we've developed, in coordination with the project, we've developed certain techniques that allow us using information for information that was collected in the process of remote sensing. We may state that in the process of remote sensing, the amount of information collected is a little bit smaller, but it can allow for mapping and identifying certain indicators. I think that Mr. Viktor Mironuk will give us more details about our achievements, but there are still certain concerns around this area. For the time being, in the process of implementation of remote sensing technology, we've realized certain requirements for methodological and technological foundations of the national inventory of forests. We have to approach the designing of the plots in a different way. We need to use another method of design when we plan lesser amount of plots with more information about them. The change of methodological and technological approaches will also need additional amendment of regulations that are currently in effect in Ukraine. On top of that, apart from national inventory in the context of European integration, remote sensing of soil. Well, in the end of year 22, Euro Commission made public the procedures for monitoring for sustainable European forests. An important novelty should become the system of graphic identification of a number of indicators, data about which will be collected by Euro Commission using standardized methods and based on the technology of Copernicus satellites. It's also expected that national inventories will be the main source of harmonized data for the new European system of forest monitoring. The procedure identified by the project for the standardization of satellite images of Copernicus satellites provide for more opportunities for inventory. For example, use of the different definition of the satellite imagery. We expect to get the images on an annual basis with resolution of 10 per 10 pixels. And in case of adoption of this procedure, it will clearly identify the implementation of the technology in the system of monitoring of the forests on a national level. Apart from the national capabilities that we've got as a result of implementation of remote sensing-based inventory, we expect to get benefits from the all-European system ENFIN, and currently the head of the inventory center is on the way from Switzerland, having taken part in certain events related to national inventory of forests. Many national forest inventory have many years of experience of use of satellite imagery and other remote sense-based methods. We work with a number of think tanks with an aim to implement more technological means of remote sense inventory. For example, last year, there was a map of the German forest published based on the satellite imagery with the data of 3 years forest inventory. Let me start wrapping it up here. So talking about regulation or governing of the national inventory of forests, here we're facing a number of challenges that are supposed to be regulated at the legislative level. We need to continue and to preserve the opportunity to keep our staff, but human resources, and to do that we need to involve more financial resources. And if we don't proceed with the national inventory, we have certain risks in terms of losing our track on the way of joining the European Union. Thank you very much for your attention. And talking about the methods that we were using to collect and analyze the information, it will be all told by Mr. Berniuk. Please don't leave the chair. We have an opportunity to ask you some small questions before we proceed to the following presentation. Probably there are any questions on the floor, or maybe we have any questions from our online participants. There are more than 70 of them that I'm currently seeing. Well, we're having a question. Mr. Volker Zasek has a question. I've just seen that it was written there that the regulation of the process is important, but within the last couple of years, I'm having an impression that those legislative provisions on implementation of national inventory, we understand in Germany we have more, it can be developed more liberally, and we don't. And when we change something in our technology, we first ask the legislators whether it can be implemented or not, if they allow. Do you share the same opinion? Thank you very much, dear Volker. You're absolutely right, because let's put it like this. When we started the national inventory of forests, it just happened so that the legislation was already in effect. And since it was the first legislation of that type, there were certain restrictions imposed with regard to impossibility of to make amendments within short term. But at the same time, when we were implementing the new procedure for forest inventory, and it was correct in our opinion, we've added such a legislative provisions that organization that is involved in such works is supposed to influence it, because even in the process of our small work, we keep coming across different concerns, different challenges, and we already see that we need to have certain provisions amended. So I think that probably thanks to this project, thanks to your support, you help us in harmonization of regulations or bringing them in compliance with the European regulations. Probably we should come up with the amendments that should facilitate certain changes or approaches to national inventory of forests. Because even now, as we talk about the application of remote sensing of soils, we see that probably we can reduce the number of spots, which will result in reduction of expenses, and at the same time we hope it would not result in reduction of quality of collected information. So those amendments, those changes are supposed to be made quickly in order to use the talent pool more efficiently, because we have many works related directly to the collection of information in the field conditions. It involves logistics, and we have to continue thinking about the expenses optimization as I've mentioned, to preserve the quality and precision of the information collected about the forests of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Victor, for such a comprehensive answer. And now let's proceed to the following presentation. Very briefly. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So is there a difference between inventory of the state forests and local level forests that are subject to inventory in terms of pace or support, in terms of preparation? What are the common concerns? Thank you for your questions. Well, national inventory covers all of the territory, all of the forests, regardless their form of ownership and category of forests. This is why the approach to national inventory is the same in all of the forests, but at the same time, during our field work, we stumble upon the view of the owners of the forest. For example, if it's a state forest agency, it's easier to understand. Here we have access to the territory, which is strictly regulated, but in certain cases, we still have to additionally explain the essence of our work and spend certain time for settlement of some organizational issues. I'm talking about national reserves and other forms of ownership. Yes, we try to regulate it during our work, so probably we discuss it with Volker. You know that we have to probably more communicate it to the society to demonstrate the importance of this work that we're doing. This is why, yes, there are concerns, and currently we have opportunities to solve them.
Thank you, colleagues. And now we move to our next keynote presentation, which will be delivered online. An expert of the project Sustainable Forestry Implementation, Mr. Heine Polley, and he has a huge experience in carrying out inventarization in Germany, because during 25 years he headed that organization. So, Heine, you're with us. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Perhaps anybody will give me a response if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We hear you. Yeah, that's okay.
Dear participants in Kiev and online, wherever you are, when we talk about remote sensing-based inventory for Ukraine, we should also remember that this is a part of the National Forest Inventory. The National Forest Inventory in Ukraine is carried out under very special conditions. There is no other country with a National Forest Inventory during a war. And the Ukrainian colleagues are doing a great job under these conditions. But perhaps you don't see my presentation. I would ask Halina to start the presentation. Alina, could you start?
It's on.
We have the presentation on the screen. Thank you.
Okay.
Everything is okay.
Yes, now there is new data on forest resources in Ukraine from a remote sensing project, and the terrestrial data collection is continuing in Ukraine where possible. This was not a self-runner. In my presentation, I would like to explain the success factors for a national forest inventory, what is required, and what needs to be done. In my many years of work experience with the National Forest Inventory in Germany, I have realized that a national forest inventory is much more than just a statistical design. But that's not what we learn at university. Now let's start with the first slide. For all participants not understanding Ukrainian language, I have just
We have the slides in Ukrainian language.
Yeah, I have just pushed a link to the chat where you can download a one-page summary from this presentation. Now, please send the next slide. Thank you. First of all, politicians and decision makers in state authorities must recognize the need for information. A national forest inventory costs money, but what is the benefit? The benefit arises when good decisions are made on the basis of the data for the well-being of the forest and the society. The required political report and the willingness to provide the funding will only arise if the need for information is recognized by the decision-making bodies. The support for the project from various interest groups is helpful in this process. The National Forest Inventory must therefore be placed in as broad a context as possible. Their data is not only important for forestry, but is also relevant for many other areas of society. These include the wood processing industry, bioenergy, employment and income in rural areas, biodiversity and nature conservation, climate protection, and international agreements. Next slide, please. At the same time, it must be shown how the required information can be obtained. Scientific sound concepts must be developed. Experience from other countries can be helpful here. However, national conditions must be taken into account. Different solutions are possible. The concepts should be developed in contact with potential data users in order to best fulfill their needs. In addition, their lobbying will support the realization of the National Forest Inventory. Only scientifically sound concepts that are supported by politicians have a good chance for realization. Next slide, please. Next important steps are legalization, financing, and institutionalization. As a state task, the National Forest Inventory needs a legal basis. This should be specific, but at the same time allow some freedom in its implementation. A state agency should be commissioned and provided with a specific budget. Often the budget will be too small, then priorities must be set and options for rationalization must be developed. Continuity of staff, at least in the core area, is necessary to maintain expertise in the long term. Next slide, please. Then, of course, the forest inventory must provide the expected information. Only if it fulfills the expectations of users and financiers, its continuation will be received the required support. For some questions, the inventory will reach its limits. Then it is important to be creative and honest in utilizing the information content of the data. Conflicts may arise between scientific accuracy and the need for information. They should be decided on a case-by-case basis. Uncertainties must be communicated honestly. Next slide. To be set in value, the information must reach the target groups. For this reason, the results must be presented in a targeted and easy to understand way for interested parties in forestry and timber industry, politics, science, and for the general public. Various channels should be used for this: print and online media, conferences, and contributions to stakeholder events. Next slide, please. The trustworthiness of the National Forest Inventory is very important for its long-term continuity. There will be doubts and critics of the results, especially if they differ from expectations or from other data. Therefore, the methods must be scientifically correct and published. The Forest Inventory has the task of providing policy advice on a scientific basis, and the results must therefore be presented in a neutral and objective manner. Science must be free from political ambitions. Next, please. Once the National Forest Inventory is established, it must respond to new information needs. This requires a close observation of the development in all relevant areas of the society in order to recognize new trends and data requirements in time. This is important because many years will pass between the concept development and the availability of the data. Next, please. When necessary and possible, the methods must be improved carefully. This applies to additional attributes, new measurement technologies, software and data processing, statistical methods, and remote sensing. However, comparability with previous surveys must always be ensured to avoid methodological bias for change estimations. Next, please. External knowledge must be made available and used to enhance their own expertise. To this purpose, scientific networks should be established and maintained. The forest inventory must become better known and find suitable partners for joint projects. This broadens the scientific horizon and offers career opportunities for young scientists. And next, please. Number 10. With more inventory cycles and a rising success and awareness of the National Forest Inventory, their scope and complexity will increase. For this reason, human resources must expand in the medium term. And please, the next and last slide. This gives an overview of the 10 tasks. And now let's have a look where Ukraine is standing at the moment with its National Forest Inventory. The key factors 1, 2, 3 in green are successfully realized. The key factors 4, 5, 9 in blue are currently in progress. Number 6 in yellow must be considered. And least but not last, the numbers 7, 9, and 10 in gray that are tasks for the future. That was my presentation. I wish Ukraine every success for the continuation of the National Forest Inventory in a peaceful future. Thank you.
Дякую, Хейно, за прекрасну чудову.
Thank you, Heine, for your beautiful presentation. And can you tell us, please, are there any questions or raise hands from online or offline audience? Well, while we're waiting, I would start by asking Heine, at your last slide, among the successfully carried out events, you stated funding, but at the same time, at the last slide, of Ukrlis project, we've seen that this is treated as a challenge, getting enough funding. So, how to ensure stable inflow of funding for the needs of national inventory project?
This is, of course, one of the most difficult questions. And there is not a general rule, but if you follow these recommendations from 1 to 10, then it will get good conditions to gather funding. And I'm very glad that despite the difficult situation, Ukraine has reached in the National Forest Inventory such a lot of data and have collected the data and is prepared to evaluate it.
Дякую, Хейно.
Thank you, Heine, and I feel that this question might be discussed in greater detail during the panel discussion. And now we move to the next presenter, and the floor goes to Viktor Miranyuk, professor forest mensuration and forest management department, National University of Life and Environmental Sciences of Ukraine. Esteemed colleagues, first of all, I would like to state that it's great being here today with you. For me, that was a scientific dream about 15 years ago, to make sure that what I was doing to be finally beneficial, both for the people and the country at large. That's why, well, to what extent it's useful, it's not up to me to evaluate, but still this presentation is all about the challenges. About the challenges that the tasks and assignments for the forestry management, namely inventory and stock taking, and the results of the project that we present today have been applying unique technology of remote sensing. Well, of course, this is not something very new or breakthrough for the 21st century, but somehow in Ukraine, we didn't have a single systemic evaluation of forestry resources conducted at the national level based on the officially collected data in the forests of Ukraine. That's why I would like to stop at the goals. And first and foremost, what we're talking about is that in Ukraine, we need to harmonize our approaches that we use for the purpose of stock taking of forests. And of course, the situation in Ukraine right now is such that most likely this system could not meet the needs of the forest inventory. Moreover, the problem that we have in terms of national inventory forests tells us that even traditional statistical approach of the national inventarization that has been practiced worldwide could not generate the answers to the questions that we want to hear.
Because a significant part of Ukraine is inaccessible in terms of collecting information, but at the same time, dramatic changes are happening there at the forest. So the question is, how can we track those changes? Well, this inventory for the first time helped us to obtain the special evaluation of or assessment of forest resources in Ukraine. So I will focus on the techniques, on the results that we've obtained, but at the same time, I would like to say that the goal of this work is not only to make an assessment in time, but also to develop the foundations for long-term monitoring of the forest. Getting back to the previous presentation of Heine, who was mentioning the fact that the systemic approach and the comparability of the results is a key foundation of the of any inventory of the forest. This is why the approach that we were using was aimed at having the results of the year 23 not being in contradiction with the results of the year 25. Now let me proceed to the methodology. The presentation contains a number of slides. Since we've gathered here to discuss the results without understanding of the methods, probably one might get an impression that it was not done in a correct way. So let me start with the source of the data. The main share of the information was based on the data collected by the National Forestry Agency of Ukraine. I'm talking about 18 regions where more than 4,000 inventory plots were inspected. But the major share of the territory, as you understand, was not covered by the most recent survey. This is why the concept of our approach that was developed during this project was to provide support with the field data collected during the forestry resources inventory. Definitely, they cannot be integrated directly into this system. So we had to analyze every single plot, every single piece of stock. So it helps us to get information about those plots, about those territories that we don't have access to. And it happens so in Ukraine that the first task we're solving is the mapping, the creation of the map. This is where we always start, and the data that we get during field surveys is not always sufficient. That's why we had to visually interpret the data. The trained team of experts who visually inspected 20,000 plots to identify which plots are forested and which are not. Well, on this slide, you can see the specifics of the and special disposition, how the data was positioned in time. And you see the large fraction of the territory of Ukraine is the territory from which we cannot obtain any data. And now let's proceed to the following phase, how we can put it all together in one system. Even having collected all the data, we cannot analyze the forest statistically because they all represent different years of growth. This is why we had to use the satellite imagery of different years so we could tie them together and to develop forecasted models to build the maps as of the year 2023. So this work is based on the free satellite imagery data made by Sentinel satellites. And after the preliminary analysis of this data, for example, from Sumy region, we've taken the decision that it would be optimal in terms of precision of calculable resources. It would be to provide the result on the map with the distance of 20 meters. To prepare this data for analysis, we were using the most up-to-date algorithms that allowed us to equalize the spectral data in time, so we can get precise results for different time periods. And all this algorithm was built on the Google Cloud platform. And obviously, without such resources, fulfilling such tasks would be quite onerous. Now let's proceed to the methodology, to the algorithm. You see that it involves a number of stages. The stages that this inventory was consisting of. And then the following stage was the use of the algorithms that allowed us to create the map of the forest. The following stage is mapping of forest attributes, taxation indicators, including stock, growing stock, height, diameter, age, and even carbon sampling. all the maps were subject to statistic analysis, and only after that they were used in our work. We were using the statistic approaches that are published and are scientifically recognized. And again, inventory is not just building the maps, it's evaluation. This is why we were using the statistic approaches to acquire the assessments, so height, diameter, and other parameters. So talking about contribution to this part, the work was only available thanks to the fact that we already have well-developed algorithms for processing of data. We've integrated the global experience, the European experience, the experience of the United States to build this system. Every model was thoroughly inspected. Again, I was mentioning it already. We used a number of approaches to understand that the model is working, or otherwise it should have been improved. And before I proceed to the results directly, let me draw your attention to this slide. Here you can see the link to the website where all of the results of this study are available. The results of the remote sensing based inventory. There is the English version. Please follow this link to get yourself familiarized with the results of this study. We are open in terms of our approaches. We are open in terms of the results, and we are ready to hear to all of the concerns and comments to be able to work on improvement of our techniques, because basically we're trying to build the system of inventory that provides for faithful information. So the first result is the area of the forests. Well, if we see the latest assessments published in the scientific works, we can find out that according to some assessments, the area of the forest has grown. According to the others, it has reduced. So again, it's a matter of techniques, of methodology. Again, the rough forests in Ukraine that are not still accounted. So the area of the plots covered with forests is a little bit more than the declared one. And there is a number of reasons behind that. For example, we may talk about the forests that have grown in the abandoned agricultural fields. There is a problem with other plots that do not submit to the State Forestry Agency. And there is also specifics about the methodology that I've mentioned today. And as you see, the criteria for identification of land plots was in fact a synthetic understanding of the forest as a vegetated area that is 50% forested within one pixel. So is it bad for the assessment? No, I wouldn't say so, because it creates more potential for having any plot which is of interest to you, having overlaid with these maps, which is your area of interest. So this is basically the essence of the approach for the self-growing forests. Without such maps, we cannot account for more forests that have grown recently. Then another map is the map of dominant species in Ukraine. Again, here you will be able to see 30 dominant species, like 30 species which are dominant in the forests of Ukraine. Why? Because there's quite simple reason behind that. We were doing a serious job and we want to be responsible for our results. If we don't see any opportunity of documenting some species that is not represented in our drawdown, we don't just do it. Again, the maps are grouped by 7 types that include main dominant species in Ukraine, and some of them are just grouped together. We were grouping them to make sure they represent the most typical types of vegetation in Ukraine. Currently, we see no opportunity, at least based on the data available to us, to differ between species in our forest. This is why this area may be represented by one class in this map. Probably the most interesting result that was not yet mentioned in previous works are the maps divided by forest attributes. And here, probably this is the essence of the remote sense-based inventory that allows for comparing parameters, for example, which is the carbon reserve in this type of vegetation, the average diameter, average height, or average stock. And we evaluated a little bit, for example, talking about average stock, we evaluated a little bit more than it was presented in previous presentations. So it's commonly recognized, and the maps allow for identification both average and specific indicators, which is important for different tasks of forestry administration. Result number 4. Well, result which is related to the table information that we were able to acquire. So on top of the maps, which are easily available for review and for application, we've also prepared the tables with assessments, and there are 2 types of assessments. I'm talking about those interested parties who will be following the link to our website to get themselves familiarized with the results. So let me give you the clear instructions. So we have tables with 3 entries. So it's the species, another grouping indicator, and basically the assessment of this indicator. All that data is in compliance with what you see on the map. So what is the shortcoming behind this data? The shortcoming is that the majority of the models, they have a certain degree of precision. So those maps for the small areas of interest. So if you're interested about the stock, say, of oak or pine within certain territorial community, they may not work for you because there are certain concerns with regard to precision of the models. But again, those results, I cannot say they're unfit. They are absolutely important for analysis on a scientific basis and for further assessment. And again, this result gives us understanding of distribution of forest resources in Ukraine. There is an option to export the data. You can build the online graphs based on this data. So I encourage everybody to visit our website to get yourself familiarized with the data. Yet another result is what we call the official result of the forest inventory, 2-dimensional tables with assessment of statistical assessment.
And here we try to follow the following principle. If we cannot measure a certain indicator within the scope of a certain administrative unit, because we don't have enough field data to make the measurement, then we don't. Okay, the data are grouped nationwide. Using the whole massive of data, and we also aggregated the data grouped by dominant tree species. And again, this is a very rare result indeed, something that is impossible to do without mapping. We also looked at those territories that have suffered the most as the result of this war. As for administrative data, we only cover the figure of the total area of forest, but the issues of forest attribute assessment is still an open-ended question. If we continue this project, then I'm convinced that with the new field data, we'll be able to receive the full set of forest attributes, even at the level of administrative oblasts. Now, about the quantitative data might be of interest to you. So at this various slides, you can learn more about the area and the GSV for dominant species. You can see 2/3 of the forest area is dominated by deciduous tree species, while pine forests occupy only about 28%. So some people might believe that, look, statistically speaking, or the national evaluation of forests in Ukraine, uh, s- uh, circa 2011, those data were different. Yeah, and we agree because we use different interpretation of the dominant species. So yeah, there are certain methodological issues like that. We can provide justification for our position, but these results are extremely important to construct a better understanding of the current status quo. We also looked at the breakdown of the forest area and mm, forests broken down in age groups. The step is 20 years here because we thought that if the step would be only 10 years, we risk not getting enough statistically uh, statistics. Well, in Ukraine, as you can see on this slides, our forests are of the average age, and the highest GSV are observed in the age of 101 to 120 years, then it decreases. Now, forests at regional level and the average resources. The largest forest area are in Carpathian Mountains regions, of course, and that's forests in Mykolaiv, Odessa, Kherson, and Zaporizhia is substantially less. This forest coverage percentage is less than 2%. Again, according to the latest inventory results, uh, so our forest protection zones are very narrow and the satellite picture might not see them. So some of the areas might have been ignored or lost because of military hostilities. Forest resources by ecozones, I haven't seen such results presented previously because the major unit here is oblast, right? While our results allow to group data using any configuration of the zones of interest. And so you can see the statistics here. The forest area compared to the stock volume of each of those areas, like Northern Steppe, Southern Steppe, Crimean Mountains, Forest Steppe, Alicia, and Carpathian Mountains. So please learn more on our website. Another unique from the standpoint of what we can achieve is the data for war affected forest areas. And in this regard, about 1.7 million hectares approximately were affected. And you can see what stock volume we have, the total growing stock volume, and uh, what are the main types of trees, their age, etc. And again, that's what's left as of 2023, because this is as of 2023, this map. Now, advantages and drawbacks of this inventory. Let's be open, honest, and candid, and let's soberly praise the advantages, but also recognize the drawbacks. But those drawbacks could be improved as soon as we get access to new data and when we start using more potential, both in standpoints of data collection and data processing and follow-up analysis, of course, analytics. This is for the first time ever that our approach allows to evaluate the total area and other indicators of all of the forests in Ukraine, but some of the forests might not be accounted for, especially in the south of the country, and probably will have to change the size of the pixel to see narrower strips of forest or add additional source data relevant for those particular territories. But you need to recognize that we operate with a huge massive of data that we need to process. So the smaller pixel, the more problems with processing, the more mistakes. So we need to draw a line here. And at some point of time, it's up to us to decide what should be the precision of the maps in Ukraine. We offer results covering all forests, national, municipal, any. And of course, our major focus was on the regional level, and it's a shame that we only covered the areas with the uh, forest at the level of obelisk, because the other segmentation is for ecosystems. But again, this is only a temporary limitation. If we keep getting our hands on raw field data with the continuation of satellite imagery, we can detailize in years to come our maps. Now let's talk about the costs. This remote component is not as expensive as field expenditures. So, and by the way, we haven't paid for satellite imagery. They're free of charge. They could be uploaded by anyone. The only specificity here is that we use it with the official national inventory of forest data. So those maps become unique with this overexposed captions. But also there are certain limitations in identification of the uh, age or type of trees, especially for difficult multi-layer areas. So we need to keep working here by involving new technologies of radar scanning, for instance, and I can see great potential for LiDAR scanning of forests again, not just to create nice looking maps, paying huge funds for that, no, but to help field brigades, crews to collect data at in the areas where it's difficult to collect data. We have numerous examples how it's done, like the inventory of forests in Alaska is using this approach. So we can use best practices from all around the world. With that, I would like to offer you the ability to upload the results of our national survey from our website. So please make the best use of them, criticize the data if you have to, because we're looking for any constructive criticism. Thank you. Thank you, Victor, for your impressive presentation and quite impressive result. I can see that we have lots of questions shared in chat, but we'll start with them at the panel discussion slot. We just have time for one question now. Let me pick one question shared online from Dmitro Karapchuk, the Forestcom organization. Did you compare the results of forest needs with similar open data of Maryland University? And if yes, what is the difference after this comparison? Thank you. Well, the results of this survey have not been compared yet because we had quite a strict deadline to produce all the maps, but the comparisons were done in previous years using the prototypes of this approach. And yeah, there are certain problems of Maryland maps in terms of interpretation of forest losses or in total area of forest in Ukraine as well. So of course, the local survey especially builds on correct data, which be much more accurate than Maryland's map. Thank you, Victor. And it's great to know that dreams come true. So this is a feather in your hat, this survey. And there are other questions, but we'll ask them at the panel discussion. Now the floor goes to the last keynote speaker, the expert of the SFI project, Mr. Volker Sasse. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to briefly tell you about the potential tasks, future tests of the RS inventory. RS inventory provides reliable input data, scientifically based methodology, and robust outputs on all Ukrainian forests. And this just helps to identify the potential of using such resources in the future, namely further structuring of RS inventory output by first ownership, respectively users, and two levels of protection. Next bullet, retrospective RS inventory analysis of changes in forest cover and structural forest attributes. For instance, growing stock as a base for modeling growth.
Then using RS inventory results. Sorry. It's written here in Ukrainian in case my Ukrainian is not good enough, but I'm trying. So using RS inventory results for modeling potential timber supply according to assumed forestry scenarios. Using RS technologies on a regular basis for national forest inventory, considering a slightly lower accuracy in comparison to saving money and time. And the last, RS inventory can be used for comprehensive monitoring, reporting, and verification of greenhouse gas emissions and their absorption by the forest. Thank you very much for your attention. Mr. Folker, thank you very much. I'm feeling it was really an onerous thing to do, but we have a lot of respect in you delivering your speech in Ukrainian. Now the floor has an opportunity to ask questions from Volker, either from the floor or during their panel discussion. So please, everyone's invited. Volker, I'm feeling the questions will be coming a little bit later during our second part of our event. So inviting everybody to proceed to the panel discussion. And I would like the panelists, the representatives of the State Forestry Agency, Mr. Igor, please take your seat on the panel, and the Director General of the Держліспроект. Yes, please. Mr. Andriy and Mr. Volker, please, you are kindly invited to take your seat, and our main speaker, Mr. Viktor Mironjuk. Can everybody hear me? So, dear colleagues, we are currently proceeding to the second part, the panel discussion, and let me allow myself asking a couple of questions from our panelists. First of all, I would like to start with the representative of our State Agency for Forest Resources, Mr. Igor. I was personally impressed. It turns out we have a lot of unaccounted forests. And clearly it creates for certain opportunities and challenges, and as we put it. So what are the important changes, in your opinion, that would influence the forestry policies, the implementation of the forest management strategy, and how will it all influence the way the state agency works? Well, thank you for a question. Really, in Ukraine, we have a situation quite I wanted to say a unique, but it's not unique, but it's somewhat complicated for us. Officially, according to official statistics, there is one area of the forest accounted in the country, but as the data from the from remote sensing demonstrated, the total area is almost 1.5 million hectares bigger, and it's the result of the fact that the agricultural lands that were not processed in the region of Police, specifically, where there's a lot of abandoned agricultural lands, that started getting vegetated quite quickly. So this problem is existing within the last probably 10 years. I mean, the existence of those unaccounted forests. There was even a law adopted in the parliament 2321 on preservation of Ukrainian forests in the year 22, which resulted in amendments to the forest code of Ukraine. There was the term added such as self-forestation and their accounting as a forest. So there are certain problems in this legislation, but during the RS-based inventory, we ended up in a situation where we can operate those figures more easily, the figures that are real for our lands. So using those data, we have the scientifically substantiated standard using which we can request the local governments or other government agencies, depending on the form of ownership of the forest, so that they take decision in compliance with the land code on recognition of those land plots as self-forested. As soon as they are recognized as such, we may proceed to the following phase of the process as assignment of the land plots to the owners. Thank you very much. And my second question is to our main speaker, Mr. Victor. Am I understanding it correctly that the technology that you've implemented in RS-based inventory of the forests, it allows for building dynamic historic models of forests, and if it is so, it may contain a component of forecast. So what is the scientific result in terms of fulfilling the obligations Ukraine is undertaking on the path of Euro integration? We may name a number of documents that are already signed, the obligations undertaken, and the procedures of European Union, the regulations of European Union that indicate or highlight the prevention of the degradation of the forests. Thank you very much, Mr. Pavlov. It's easier for me to say what we can do and then to decide where our skills can be applied. So definitely this work was done to enable the systemic monitoring of the forests, the monitoring of the areas, and the potential for monitoring of structural indicators such as stock and biomass. Right now, I'm already seeing the result of this work, the assessment of the areas of the forest that were lost as a result of Russian armed aggression. That's the direct technique that allows us to evaluate the areas of the lost forest. We will soon have all those figures available to us in terms of area, in terms of degree of damage, and it will all allow us understand what should we do next. And in terms of Euro integration, of course, we have to think about the way how to integrate it into the system of forest monitoring, because the methodology is efficient on all of the levels, all over the area of the country. Thank you very much, Mr. Victor. From what I understand, we have quite intense opportunities opening in front of us. So I would like to ask Mr. Director, how are we ready to use that technique on institutional level? We understand there are issues related to funding, to lack of personnel, but how can we better integrate the scientific community, scientific knowledge, the academia into the work that is already presented within the framework of project operation? How to do it in a way that it's not just a project, but it's a sustainable work of the center with scientific support? Thank you. I appreciate your question. Really, you mentioned it properly and correctly that we should walk hand in hand with the science, and as a result, we don't only get the technique, but we also see the opportunities for training of our personnel to have them integrated into this work. This is why this methodology that was used, this analysis of forest masses of Ukraine, in future, I hope it will be renewed and reprocessed in view of collection of more information. The models will be double checked to become of higher quality with time, and it will all be implemented in real life. So now in a Center for National Inventory, we get students and graduates involved, From the National Agricultural Academy, we have a number of young specialists working with us. Some of them continue studying, and I think that things are gonna go the right way and we'll get the right result. Well, thank you very much. We're talking about the development here, and you have quite an optimistic outlook about this work that is being done, but we clearly understand that without relevant funding, it's quite impossible. And I wanted to ask Mr. Folker, in that context, that you were brave enough to talk about the perspectives, but about without funding, it's impossible. The government of Germany remains an incredibly important and intense partner of Ukraine, not only in terms of fighting for Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, but talking about the long-term cooperation in the forestry sector. That's the quality mark. So what are the perspectives and what can all those present here do to contribute to funding of the work that is being done under the project of National Forest Inventory? Thank you very much for your question. I can inform you that just this morning we had a meeting of the team on the management of our project, and right there we were talking about other ways to support Ukraine in its implementation of forest inventory using the RS techniques and all of the prospects that I've mentioned. They were paid a lot of attention during that meeting, they enjoyed not only the attention but the support. I can say that there were representatives of the German Ministry for Agriculture and Forestry, and they've expressed quite quite a substantial commitment that the project would be continuing, because officially it's supposed to be closing in autumn, and all of those prospects that I've mentioned, they are again confirmed are enjoying that support that I've mentioned during the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Folker. Dear colleagues, now we may proceed to the second part of the panel discussion, and I'm inviting the studio to ask the questions, and let me check the chat for additional questions that are being asked online. Yes, Mr. Yuri, please. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for this opportunity to ask questions. Yuri Marchuk, I'm the Dean of a Chair in National Agricultural Academy. During important events like the one held by our colleagues, we have two problems. First is legislation, which is more or less solved. Mr. Zoski is in direct relation with this Mr. Vitaly, with whom we initiated the amendments on legislation. It all started with the World Bank system, and eventually it resulted in adoption of legislation in the parliament. So there is legislation in effect. There are scientific achievements, there are opportunities. The main problem is the funding, and in its relation, as long as the funds are not so abundant in the country, I have a number of suggestions in this area. I was an expert on forestry in National Security and Defense Councils. So we have Carbon Foundation that the ministry is working on, and having all those assessments of carbon provided by Professor Mernyuk, we may state that there are reserves available. So why those industries that have emissions in the air, why wouldn't they contribute to this carbon foundation? Again, if we work more with the tax code and we prove it to the Ministry of Finance that we can establish the fund for national inventory, where a part of those carbon money would be going to. We can also start talking to different owners of the forest. If, for example, 1 hryvnia comes from 1 cubic meter of timber, we could get 15 million hryvnia. So it's a tax on turnover. It's not a problem. And another concern is the amount of dividends that don't reach the budget, but those which remain with the businesses. Again, some part of those dividends could be used to fill that fund. So my suggestion, as long as I was related to a number of the adopted laws, I know the situation, I know the way it happens. I think that now that we have a representative of the Ministry of Ecology and there is a representative of the zealous, maybe we can create a task force and I can contribute by developing approaches, and we can also establish a fund that would be able to receive the grant funds from the organizations in Europe that understand the importance of Ukrainian forests. So we could accumulate some amount of money to cover for funding of this facility. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. And so we have the first proposal made. Well, by raise of hands, interventions from the audience. Please introduce yourself. Thank you. My name is Igor Anapchuk from the National Center of the Greenhouse Emissions. We are under the Ministry of Environmental Protection, but from the client side, so to speak. It's a pleasure to be present at this presentation today because the issue of all the data about the forest data is very important in terms of climate reports, climate change. So let me start with the question. In your plans, will you take into account the data of state cadastre on titles, on the property titles? Because one of the potential issues of using land plots for agricultural purposes and uses, but now the distance sensing qualifies it as forest. Okay, I got your question. Victor, will you start with us? Yeah. First of all, thank you for asking it. And it's true that when we say forests, we mean that those forests could be at any territory, agricultural land as well as what is qualified as forestry land. So we work closely with Geokadastre, and we have enough information to make the breakdown using the distance sensing maps on all types of property based on the information that we have in and of course when conducting national inventarization, we make the breakdown on all types of property everywhere. Thank you. Is it a proposal or did you want to add something here, right? Well, truth be told, the German government, as part of the funding of various international climate initiatives, it's planned to identify all land plots in Ukraine. We've been waiting for this for a long time, since 2020 probably. And my proposal is that as soon as we launch this project, we will be able to work closely with people who would be involved to integrate the results of this work. Thank you, thank you. So there is a proposal for collaboration for the best use of resources to obtain joint results. Okay, colleagues, I would like to ask you the questions from online, namely a couple of questions from Lyubov Polyakova, namely question number one. Is it possible that what you stated includes this total area, parks or other greenery areas? That's the question to Viktor Valentinovich, right? Was it possible to identify what's happening there? And I would like to learn more. But all of you will get a copy of the printed results. So those of you who are with us online, well, that's your loss because it's going to be physically handed out. Yeah, I tried to mention it already that we covered all forest areas of Ukraine. Anything that could be qualified as a forest. All the other breakdowns could be done like what Igor Anapchuk said. You want to know the total area of some national parks? Just tell us which and we'll measure it for you. Okay, what's planned to do to officially prove the collected data? And this question is quite difficult. Yeah, let me try and respond to this, even though it's a complicated issue. But speaking about the National Inventory Project, its results are official by default because we've been trying to use the methodologies and the initiatives that will confirm the official status of this information for domestic purposes. But since it's only year 3 that we've been involved in this process, while the life cycle is measured in 5 years, we need to collect data for 5 years straight in order to give statistically justified data. So this is an interim report, and let's wait when the first 5-year cycle is over. Yeah, the first cycle is 5 years, but with the beginning of this military aggression, we introduced the changes into these procedures where we stated that the first cycle could exceed 5 years. And the third question is from Lyubov Polyakova. So, like I stated before, we didn't have field data on that territory. That's why we used the most relevant, updated, and confirmed by remote sensing data. Data collected in 2019, 2020. So we updated the 2014 data again, provided that there were no land losses in that area. Well, my next question is from Evgeny Hani from FSU Ukraine. So, who could use the collected data and whether it could be used as an official data to make managerial decisions? We have received partial response, but how it can it be used now to make managerial decisions? Thank you for your question. So this data is being used by national authorities for the purposes of strategic planning. So that's what we need to take into consideration when making our plans. That's why it's extremely important for the for Ukrainian economy, for its future growth and development. Can I add to this something? Sorry for interrupting you, but it's a follow-up to what you said. So, as of today, mapping results that Victor Miranyuk mentioned, those masks, forest or no forest, we already use this data. Inter-regional forestry management departments use this data to suggest what areas should be requalified as forests. This is an ongoing process. And we will reassign those territories and assign them to concrete users. So these are certain positive results from the use of this information, and it will only grow. Victor has shared the link of his website, and that's the place where people would finally be able to find everything of interest to them in one place. I have a follow-up question to both keynote speakers about the official use of those results, and partially it deals with the funding. So look, what we have identified right now only suggests that forestry resources are much bigger than what we have now and what we have. We have bigger areas than we thought. That's why I would have asked, how come we don't increase the volume of use, colleagues? What stops us to increase the volume of funding? Well, I started answering this question. So forest management happens in such a way that the forestry areas should be assigned to concrete users. And after all the proper forest management procedures have been concluded, that's where you can start formal and official cutting of trees. So using new maps, we have prepared now a number of proposals. About 20 or 30,000 hectares have been approved by local authorities in terms of the requalification, and they became forests. So 30,000 hectares, that's one small forest user area-wise that in the future would be able to make the impetus to our economy. And the second important element, which would be evaluated later, so what would be the growing rate This is something that we'll be able to start measuring only after we finalize collecting all the data, and that's where we will see that, yeah, currently we are not being using our resources properly. So it will be reconsidered. I would like to offer more figures on that subject matter.
Well, all those issues are worked on by our local governments and the executive agencies, executive bodies of our government that cover the area of more than 800,000 hectares of forested plots. The process of communication with the local governments is pretty difficult, but despite that, for the time being, more than 31,000 hectares are already confirmed as those recognized by the local governments as self-forested. So the process continues to have those land plots assigned to specific owners. Currently, the state enterprise, the Forest of Ukraine, has produced the titles to the plots covering the area of more than 7,000 hectares. So 7,000 hectares are already reassigned, and there are titles issued with their respect. Volker, I think that it was you who provoked this discussion in part of increase of the used areas. And I think that today's presentation of data may have an important meaning in terms of proper communication of the obtained results, communicating them to the wide public. And when we talk about the results, it's not only about the stock, and we should not only take pride in having more stock that can be used for timber, but also it turns out that it's the opportunity to produce more ecosystem services in our forests. That's a more positive contribution that Ukrainian forests are making for the Ukrainian society, making their contribution to prevention of global climate change and other positive things that we discussed. And I think, well, to me, it seems that our today's discussion, our today's presentation is just the beginning of the discussion about not only the amount of forest resources, but what we understand as forest resources, how we can make use of them, and do we see any other advantages behind just timber that would be of advantage to our society? And that said, I would like to proceed to those questions that are related to environmental data. There's a question asked by Bernd Bittel, a representative of Unique Land Use GmbH. So his question is as follows: in future, the environmental data may also be of incredible importance in terms of the results obtained during the national inventory. And it's very important for the public, we're saying. So respectively, how can the RS-based approach contributing to the future development? I think it's Mr. Victor who can answer this question. Well, colleagues, we can see hundreds of different assessments by different authors using different techniques, and they will all be different. So what is the amount of carbon accumulated by the Ukrainian forests? There are certain assessments, and they vary significantly. This is why I think that the satellite imagery-based inventory is the right way to make sure that in future we can report on the forest resources on a systemic basis as well as on timber. But on top of that, there are more things like carbon and other things generated by the forest. So the technique is already in place. We only can develop it to obtain more updated information. Thank you, dear colleagues. We have another question online, and I think after that we can wrap up our panel discussion. So I'm seeing that there is a question from Mr. Vincent Fondorsky. Yet another representative of Unified Land Use, and his question is about the membership in the European Association of National Forest Inventory. I mean Ukrainian membership. So what is the way that the existing methods of national inventory support and contribute or are agreed with the proposals of the European Union related to regulation of monitoring for ensuring sustainability of European forests. So basically, we're talking about the project of European Union regulation of European forest sustainability monitoring. And what are the points that require changes in terms of harmonization, in terms of collection of data from the forest, techniques, and so on and so forth? It's quite a professional question, but it's directly related to that slide that was a part of your presentation. Thank you very much. So talking about this question, really, this year, Ukraine has become a part of the European Association of National Forest Inventory. We have now opportunities to exchange regulations, exchange experience, best practices. Our personnel is currently undergoing trainings. We can have access to this information. So it was quite a positive phenomenon as a part of this regulation. It's not yet adopted, but one way or another, it will be harmonized. We were saying so that the Ukrainian legislation is supposed to be able to expedite certain changes. That's why I think that in this area, we will continue working. And the information that will be available upon the results of national inventory will be harmonized and made available to European Union. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I think I was thinking about to wrap up our presentation, but there's yet another question from Ms. Lydia Rishtop. Am I understanding it correctly that your goal is not to identify the number of trees, but rather to calculate the amount of stock? Well, I'm not sure I understand this question correctly, but talking about the number of trees, yes, we have such assessment, but let me be straight. The number of trees can be deciphered real bad by the satellite imager. This is why we calculate the attributes, we calculate the amounts of stock. The number of trees is not so important for forestry. Thank you very much, Mr. Victor. Dear colleagues, I'm making this conclusion for myself that it seems like, I mean, in my opinion, as a professional, this presentation needs proper, correct interpretation, then can be communicated to our civil society, to the public. And thus, right now, we're already facing the task, on one hand, to communicate the results to the people who are involved in management decision-making. And as we see, without institutional funding, the reduction is impossible. And then we have to ensure the correct communication to the civil society, because honestly, it seems like we end up in a situation where everything is bad, the forests are not existing, and it's a full collapse everywhere. So, in my opinion, it's one of those conclusions that I'm drawing for myself based on the results of this presentation. So if we don't have any more comments, or Mr. Yuri, you want to put a period in this presentation? Give me just a small seconds, dear colleagues. Now that we're talking about political decisions, and in this narrow circle, we've already got quite a massive of information. So to make sure that it's related to the information, I can lobby this question. We need to bring this issue for consideration of the Collegium, which includes the Deputy Minister for Environmental Protection, the heads of the parliamentary groups and parliamentary committees. So let's have it considered and reviewed by the Commission, and then we can already adopt some intermediate results. And I will fully support the idea. Thank you. Thank you. I'm seeing that today every speech is very productive. Every speech contains productive comments and proposals. So we have to preserve this national heritage that we have represented by the national inventory and the center. So with these words, I would like to wrap up our today's event, our today's meeting, our today's presentation on this optimistic note. So we have everything. It turns out we have forests, we have wonderful scientists, we have people who work in State Forest Project in the Center for National Forest Inventory for quite small salary, but at the same time they do a tremendous job. And what's even more important, we have our partners with us. Volker even started talking Ukrainian today to communicate the idea to those people who can either support or undertake certain obligations, certain responsibility. And I'm convinced that we can do it using joint effort. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your input, for your efforts, for the great job you're doing, for the wonderful presentation you've made today. And I would like to say that we're not wrapping it up, we're continuing to work. See you later. Our event is over.
Набравши. Коли ми починали.